Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we're going to be making some homemade candles. Sorry this video took a little bit longer to come out. I'll display for a brief second on the screen the reason why. So that project should be coming out eventually. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this video. So here's the kit I got and everything it came with. It came with some instructions which I kind of sort of used. It came with this thermometer that I didn't end up using at all. It had some soy wax, a couple packets of that, some metal thingies and popsicle sticks. Had some beeswax too, two things of that as well. In a big bucket of things there was some wooden wicks, some regular wicks I'll call them. It also had a whole bunch of different just dried flowers for making the candles look pretty. And then it had this big metal thing for melting the wax in. Some wax colorants came with it. And then it had 4 different candle holders. One of them unfortunately came already broken, so I really only got to use 3 of them. The first step for making the candles was to melt the wax, which basically the way to do that was I took a pot of water, started boiling it a little bit, then I put the metal wax melting thing inside the pot, and then dumped a bunch of wax into it so that the wax could melt. To make sure I didn't overflow the candle, I dumped in 1 container of wax, then I stirred it around a bit and I dumped in a little bit more wax just so that I knew the volume of wax I was using wouldn't be too much for a single one of these candle holders. After I got the wax in there, it was pretty much just sitting and watching it and stirring it occasionally to break up the big chunk of wax in the middle, and just more and more wax melted over time. Once I thought I had a good amount of the wax melted, I added in some coloring. I decided to go with yellow for the candles just because, I don't know, that was the color I picked. So I just dropped a little bit of that in and then melted it along with the wax. And at the end you can see the nice yellow waxy solution. That's once the color and all of the wax has been fully melted together and stirred together. While I was melting all the wax, I also set up my first candle holder. For the start I decided to go with just a regular wick, and I used the popsicle stick to center that wick inside the holder, and then I decided to throw some of the dried flowers into it just to see how they would work. Once all the wax was melted, I just poured it into the candle holder, making sure to do it slowly and carefully so that I didn't spill any hot wax anywhere. After the wax had been poured, I took a look at it, and it turned out really cool because some of the flowers floated all the way to the top, some stayed at the bottom. There's a couple that are kind of in the intermediate between the two, which I think turned out pretty cool. For the second candle, I wanted to experiment with making a scented candle, so I bought a bunch of essential oils. One smelled like juniper berry, one smelled like cedar, one smelled like pine needles, one smelled like sandalwood, and one smelled like cypress. And I just decided to give one of these a go. For the second candle, I decided to make a yellow candle again. Not really a reason other than I didn't want to have to clean out the melting pot every single time to remove the yellow coloring. Once the wax had melted, I decided to go with cedar for the scent. I wasn't really sure how much I needed, so I just added a bunch of drops. And kind of what I was going for was being able to smell the candle without the scent being totally overpowering. Once I had all of the drops added, I then just gave it a stir to mix the oil in with the melted wax. For this candle, I also decided to try a wooden wick. I didn't want to put flowers in it just because I wanted to see what one without flowers would look like, but I also wanted to try a wooden wick because I've never seen that before and I thought it'd be cool. The wooden wick was a little bit harder to keep centered. I'm assuming that's maybe what those metal things were for, but I just was very careful and I held it in position and I made sure I didn't pour hot wax on my hand. For candle number 3, the process was basically the same as before. The only difference this time was that I used pine needle as the smell. So I just added a bunch of wax in, mixed it together, let it melt, added the yellow coloring, and then dumped in a little bit more of the pine needle. After the wax had melted, I decided to go with kind of a similar thing to candle 1 with just a regular wick and then a bunch of dried flowers in it. So I set that up and then poured the wax into it. After I'd poured the wax in, I set up this time lapse just so that you guys could see what drying wax looks like over time. I thought it was kind of cool, almost like frost forming on glass a little bit, but obviously wax instead. After the wax had hardened up and set a little bit, I did read the instructions this time, and It said to let them sit and fully cool down, so I just pushed them off to the side of my counter for a couple hours and let them fully cool. Once they had cooled down, there was unfortunately a thing that happened with all of them where right around the wick, this kind of large indent formed, and I'm not super sure what caused that, but I'm not gonna do something crazy like read the instructions to find out. So I figure it'll just be when the candle's lit, the wax will pool down in there and fix that anyway. The final step before lighting the candles was to trim down the wicks, and I had to do this because if the wick is too long, then the heat of the flame doesn't draw the wax up it to be burned, so you have to trim it down quite a bit so that the heat can draw the wax up. Alrighty, time for the initial test. It did take a little bit for the candle to light. I'm assuming this is because you have to wait for the wax to be drawn up the wick, but I gave it one go, it didn't really work, and then I gave it a second go, and it lit, and it was bright, and it worked. The second candle with the wooden wick was kind of the same deal, where it took it a little bit to light, but once it lit, it just up and went, and it was golden. The only thing for this candle was you couldn't really smell it at all, and I think basically I would need to use an entire bottle of that oil to make it properly scented. Candle number 3 was a little bit different. I think I cut the wick shorter so it started up a lot faster, but when it got going it started to flare a whole bunch and it's kind of bright and flashy, and it did that for a little bit and it had a bigger flame, and then it just kind of settled down and it was the same as every other candle, so I'm not really sure why that happened. Once the candles were all burning, this is where I kind of realized I couldn't smell them at all. So I decided to do a sniff test and just see how close I had to get before I could really smell the candles. And you can see how close I have to bring my nose to actually be able to smell them. They smelled good. I just know that I need to add a lot more of that oil if I want to have it be smelly enough that you can smell it from, 5 feet away. The final test that I thought I should do is just to see how hard it was to turn off and then turn back on the candles. There was really no issues with this. It was just blow them out and then take the lighter and relight them. They lit right away, which, they're awesome. They're candles. They work like candles and they do great. Once I'd blown out all the candles and I looked at them in the light, I did notice that some of the flowers right around the wick were starting to get burned. I don't know there's a lot that I could do about this, but I could maybe try and push them out of the way as the wax was cooling to avoid it. And of course, the final step of this entire process is to apply the safety label that came with the kit, because you would never know about the dangers of an open flame candle if you didn't have the safety sticker on the bottom. Anyways, that wraps up this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've got a whole bunch of other projects going on right now, so hopefully I'll be able to get 2 or 3 videos out relatively quickly. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.